Greetings, dear viewers. This is the Crasmodo channel. Honda. What comes to your mind when you hear this brand mentioned? Honda is synonymous with reliability. Honda has the most victories and titles in motorcycle racing. You may have heard that it's the world's largest manufacturer of both motorcycles and internal combustion engines. And you've probably also heard a number of stories and facts about the founder of this company, Soichiro Honda. And it's quite possible that you, dear viewer, have a motorcycle of this brand sitting in your garage. So in this segment, I intend to introduce you to the history of Honda motorcycles, as well as the personality of the founder of this company. Make yourself comfortable. Enjoy watching. The history of the brand is inextricably linked with its founder, with the personality of Soichiro Honda, and this personality is extremely interesting. To sum up in a few words who Soichiro was, a dreamer, an engineer, a risk-taker, and
a complete madman.
However, let's dig deeper. Soichiro was born on November 17, 1906, in the Japanese village of Komyo, not far from Hamamatsu, to a blacksmith and a weaver. And the first thing Soichiro managed to do was survive. 5 of his older sisters and brothers died shortly after birth. His parents tried to give Soichiro as much care as possible, but hard work did not allow them to devote the necessary time and energy to raising their son. Honda was an average student. He found school subjects boring and quickly gained a reputation as a truant. And in order to hide his bad grades and frequent absences from school, Soichiro learned to forge the family seal and signed his own diary entries. By the way, this deception was uncovered when Honda started selling seals with his classmates' surnames. Little Soichiro was inspired not by textbooks, but by various technical gadgets. Honda Sr., noticing the growing popularity of bicycles in Japan, learned how to repair and service them in his workshop. And his son helped him with this, at the same time figuring out how the mechanisms worked and how they operated. Soichiro's grandfather played a big role in his upbringing. The old man gladly took the curious boy to the local mill or sawmill. What impressed the hero of our story the most at that time was the stationary internal combustion engine at one of the factories. At that time, it was a great rarity in Japan. At the age of 11, Honda took his father's bicycle and rode more than 30 kilometers to attend the air show of Arthur Smith, a famous pilot from the United States. Soichiro didn't have enough money to buy a ticket and get into the event, but that didn't stop the young man from enjoying the show by climbing a tree. And many have also heard the story of how Honda saw a car for the first time in his life. Even as an adult, Soichiro recalled that he ran after the car for a long time, and then got his hands dirty in a drop of oil left on the road and inhaled its scent. In 1922, he finished 8 grades of school and planned to enter an engineering institute, but his family's difficult financial situation put an end to further education. One day in 1922, Soichiro, while looking through the job listings in the local newspaper, found what seemed to him to be his dream job. The auto repair shop was looking for mechanics. Inspired by dreams of future success, he walked 250 kilometers and got the job. But at first he was in for a disappointment. Instead of tinkering with nuts, gears, and pistons, his duties were limited to cleaning the premises, cooking food, and looking after the owner's son. A stroke of luck helped Honda show his talents. A heavy snowfall increased the number of cars needing repairs. The regular mechanics couldn't handle the workload, so the boss allowed Soichiro to get to work. Noticing the enthusiasm with which the young employee fixed breakdowns, his boss, Yuza Sakakibara, promoted Honda. The dream of our story's hero came true, and he started tinkering with cars instead of working as a servant, while the owner of the workshop began diligently teaching the young man the intricacies of servicing machinery. In 1923, a powerful earthquake struck Japan, and because of it, the workload in the workshop increased significantly. This was the moment when Soichiro proved himself as a professional mechanic, despite his young age. The reputation of a talented craftsman served him well. Honda soon began earning about 1,000 yen a month. For comparison, a fairly successful merchant could boast such a profit in half a year, and at this point, Honda loses his head. With his mischievous character and newfound money, he starts having fun in his free time away from work. You shouldn't think that he went downhill, but Soichiro definitely knew how to relax. And it's no coincidence that he got the nickname the Playboy from Hamamatsu. Hanging out at bars, taking girls for a ride in his car, speeding on the road, all of that became routine. One time, Honda and two ladies managed to drive off a bridge into a river and miraculously survived. And do you know what else Honda was crazy about? Racing. Back in 1923, Yuza Sakakibara decided to take part in races. And for the races, Yuza, his younger brother, and several mechanics, including Honda, started building race cars. The first car was the Art Daimler, and the next one was a machine with an engine from a Curtiss biplane. And this car is more important for history, because in November 1924, Honda participated in a race as a mechanic and sat in the car as the second person next to Sakakibara Jr. And in this race, their team won. And from that moment on, many things were inspired by racing and made for racing. In 1928, Honda successfully completed his training and opened his own Art Shokai branch in Hamamatsu. Soichiro enjoyed working on improving car parts. He came up with the idea to replace wooden wheel spokes with metal ones, which are stronger and not affected by moisture. In 1928, he patented this invention, and in 1931, he presented it to the general public at the National Industrial Exhibition. In this photograph, taken in 1935, you can see the Art Shokai branch in Hamamatsu. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see a car lifted on a special hoist that Honda designed himself. Soichiro always insisted that a person shouldn't have to do their work crawling under a car. And another trademark becomes the Snow White work overalls. It's the perfect litmus test. If the overalls are dirty, it means that some technical process is going wrong. By the mid-1930s, the branch's staff of craftsmen had grown to 30. Honda still continues to be passionate about racing. For example, one of his cars was equipped with a supercharged Ford engine, and the engine itself was tilted to the left because the race took place on a counterclockwise track. This solution made it easier to take turns. In the race on July 7, 1936, Soichiro and his brother Benjio participated in this very race car. They, speeding at 120 kilometers per hour, collided with another car. The car flipped over 3 times, ejecting the driver and mechanic. Soichiro escaped with a dislocated shoulder and scrapes, but his younger brother suffered a broken spine. Honda, after spending some time in the hospital, took part in another race in October of the same year, 1936, and that would be the last race where Soichiro competed as a driver. Thinking about what to do in the automotive industry, our hero decides to start producing piston rings. In those years, a piston ring cost more than its equivalent weight in silver. Honda enlists the support of Shichiro Kato and establishes the Tokai Seiki Company. Honda locks himself in the workshop and tries to develop a piston ring. As a result, Toyota, which had signed a contract for a trial batch of 50 rings, accepted only 3 for use. To clarify Soichiro's approach for you, before developing the rings, he said, "I can build anything if I see it at least once." Honda realizes 8 years of school and workshop experience are insufficient for the project, which ultimately failed. He goes to study at the Industrial Institute in Hamamatsu, and at first listens to the lectures with great enthusiasm. His school habits soon become apparent, which is quite amusing. One day, the principal called Soichiro into his office and told him he would not get his diploma. During his studies, he never bothered to take a single exam, and Soichiro replied that a diploma doesn't guarantee you'll make money. In short, he was expelled, but Honda still managed to attend lectures for another year as an unregistered student. As a result, after about 2 years, he managed to create a piston ring of acceptable quality. He left Art Shokai for Tokai Seiki, and this time, things are going well. The company's production volume and client list are growing, and the main customer is Toyota. During the war, Honda learned to automate production since obviously there was a shortage of male workers during wartime. He also invented an automatic milling machine for making aircraft propellers for Nakajima aircraft. During the American bombings of the airbase in the Hamamatsu area, as well as the earthquake in 1945, the production facilities of Tokai Seiki Heavy Industry were damaged. But it was generally possible to resume ring production after the war. Honda decides to sell the company to Toyota for 450,000 yen. And he takes a creative break. And do you know what he does?
He buys a tank of alcohol and goes drinking with his friends.
During all this wild partying, which lasts about a year, Soichiro comes up with the idea to extract salt from seawater using electrolysis and sells it in his hometown. He also tries his hand at making a weaving loom, but it turns out to be too expensive and doesn't succeed. Observing the post-war devastation and the problems in the country, Honda realizes that the transportation issue is very pressing. The automotive industry is constrained, and a car itself is an unaffordable luxury for most people. The railways are destroyed and the roads are also in disrepair. In short, it's a disaster. In these harsh conditions, the bicycle becomes a sought-after means of transportation. It's simple, inexpensive, requires minimal maintenance, but at the same time, it demands effort from the rider. If only we could attach a small, inexpensive motor to it. With only a slight increase in the price of the finished product, mobility would increase significantly. One day, Soichiro was visited by a friend who, from who knows where, had gotten hold of a small kerosene engine that was used to power a military radio station. The guys quickly rigged up this engine to a bicycle, and Honda sent his wife shopping on this contraption. The local people, noticing this marvel of engineering, realized that the motorized bicycle was no harder to handle than a regular bike. Even a woman could manage it. And there was a demand for such designs. That's actually how the Honda company was born. The history of the world's largest motorcycle company begins with a small engine mounted on a bicycle frame. In 1946, Honda founded the Technical Research Institute. In one of the surviving buildings of Tokai Seiki, he, his younger brother Benjio, and a few friends worked on adapting a radio station engine to a bicycle frame. At the same time, the guys bought up the remaining engines. The first Honda A-Type appeared in 1947. At that time, there were strict fuel restrictions in Japan on kerosene and gasoline, and here comes another interesting case. One of Soichiro's ideas was to use turpentine as fuel. Turpentine, in essence, is a combustible essential oil obtained by extraction or distillation methods from various parts of coniferous trees, particularly from the roots. Soichiro buys a plot of forest land in order to also start fuel production. However, digging up the roots by hand seemed to him a difficult and time-consuming task. It was decided to remove them using dynamite. The explosion caused the pine litter to catch fire, and the forest almost completely burned down. Turpentine turned out not to be the best type of fuel, but that didn't stop Honda from creating about 500 auxiliary 50 cubic centimeter, 1 horsepower engines for bicycles during 1947 and 1948. It's worth noting that the small team was basically working just for food and out of pure enthusiasm. And Honda himself immediately set high standards for the quality of the parts. The supply of decommissioned little engines was running out, so it was decided to move forward with the development of engines and vehicles. On September 24, 1948, the company was reorganized and received the name Honda Motor Company. In the same year, Soichiro was developing the Type B cargo tricycle model with an engine increased to 89 cubic centimeters in volume. However, the vehicle turned out to be unsuccessful and did not go beyond the prototype stage. Work was also in full swing on the Type C and Type D motorcycle versions. Both of them went into production in '49. The first was a motorized bicycle with pedals and a 96 cubic centimeter two-stroke 3-horsepower engine. There was no gearbox, and power was transmitted to the rear wheel by a belt. The frame was designed by Honda, but it was manufactured by a contractor. By the way, the Model C was the company's first machine to participate in a race, and the motorcycle won the race. Can you imagine who he had to compete with? The model was already a full-fledged motorcycle. Its engine had a displacement of 98 cc in power, similar to the Model C. A 2-speed gearbox was integrated into the same unit as the engine. The Type D was also called Dream, which means mechta in our language. There is a version that, at the party celebrating the completion of the Type D, one of the company's employees said, "It feels like a dream." And Soichiro, after thinking about this phrase, officially named the motorcycle Dream Type D. The Type D bore more than a passing resemblance to pre-war German machines, particularly to Zundap. The model turned out to be popular, and initial sales were decent, but Japan's weak economy was struggling during this period. And there was also a situation where, because of some dealers, more Type D engines ended up on competitors' machines than on the Honda motorcycles that were sold. And during this period, a very fortunate event happened. Soichiro met Takeo Fujisawa in August of '49, and by October, Takeo became the managing director of Honda Motor Company for finance and sales. Meanwhile, Honda focused on motorcycle production, their components and design. Soichiro was a very talented engineer, but when it came to finance and sales, he was quite mediocre. And meeting Fujisawa would be a huge help for the company. If in the 21st century, we know 4 Japanese motorcycle giants that more or less coexist harmoniously in the market, then, in the period of the late 40s and early 50s, there were 150 firms and companies in this niche in Japan. As you can guess, 146 of them disappeared into oblivion, and Honda Motor Company had far from zero chances of becoming one of those 146. However, it was the proper distribution of responsibilities, competent company and financial management, and the organization of sales that allowed them to stay afloat. And that's exactly why Fujisawa is called the second founding father of Honda Motor Company. Honda is putting things in order with the dealers, and the outbreak of the Korean War is stimulating the Japanese economy. In a nutshell about the last point, the United States occupation authorities are in Japan, as well as a certain contingent of troops in Korea. They do their dirty business, and locally in Japan, they repair and produce various necessary things. It is this activity that stimulates the economy of the land of the rising sun. Honda is expanding its production capacity by acquiring a former loom factory in Tokyo, and also receives several grants from the government. By the end of 1950, the production volume of the Type D was 167 units per month, and by the beginning of the next year, this number had reached 300. However, sales gradually started to decline as competitors introduced more successful designs. And the Honda Dream was already outdated at that time. In October 1951, Soichiro introduced the 4-stroke E-type model. It was the company's first 4-stroke motorcycle. This engine was developed in just a couple of months by the company's engineer Kiyoshi Kawashima and had a displacement of 146 cubic centimeters. Initially, the transmission was 2-speed, but soon a third gear was added. The E-type model turned out to be extremely successful, and right from the start, this motorcycle set a record for the number of units produced in a short period of time in Japan. In 3 years, E-type production grew to 32,000 units per year. The basic E-type remained in production for 8 years, evolving through several models up to the Dream 6E with an engine capacity of 190 cubic centimeters, 1957. And also, in 1951, the company's corporate magazine, where Soichiro Honda first voiced the philosophy of Honda Motor Company, which consisted of 3 joys: the joy of creation, the joy of selling, and the joy of buying. A year later, in 1952, another company bestseller appeared, the auxiliary bicycle engine F-type, which was also called Cub F. This engine had similar power to its predecessors, but weighed half as much. To promote this product, Fujisawa initiated the sending of 50,000 letters to bicycle dealers in Japan. Out of 30,000 respondents, 13,000 were selected. To give you an idea of the scale, when production started in October 1952, Honda shipped 6,000 units of the Cub F, and in December, 9,000. The auxiliary engine was produced up until 1954 and sold in large numbers. By the way, in 1952, the F-Type became Honda's first export product. It appeared on the shelves of Taiwanese stores. In 1953, the 100 CCJ type model appeared, which also became the progenitor of a whole family. This lightweight motorcycle is also called Bentley, which means convenient in translation. These three popular motorcycle models, E-Type, F-Type, and J-Type, allowed the company to significantly improve its financial situation, expand production capacity, increase its staff, and make a strong statement in the local market. A key milestone for the company was producing power engines for cultivators, generators, water pumps, and more. This stage began with the H-Type engine in 1953. With the improvement of the economic situation in Japan, Honda focused on producing more advanced equipment. Soichiro had a strong affection for four-stroke engines and didn't care for smoky two-stroke conversions. However, Honda understood during the company's early days that producing two-stroke engines was a necessary step on the path to greatness. By 1954, Honda had conquered the Japanese market and had little competition, as the company's products were renowned for their high quality and low price. However, you recall Soichiro's character. He remained obsessed with racing and had plans for world domination that surpassed even Napoleon's ambitions. In 1954, Soichiro Honda and Kiyoshi Kawashima went on a business trip to Europe to see what was happening overseas and to acquire advanced equipment for their company. And during this trip, Honda will also attend the tourist trophy race on the Isle of Man. A few words about this race. This is one of the most, if not the most, prestigious motorcycle races in the world, both then and now. And it's also the most dangerous motorcycle event for riders. Soichiro knew from his time at Art Shokai that racing and winning are great drivers of sales and popularity. And he also understands that the machines competing on the Isle of Man are far superior to anything his company produces. Upon returning home, Soichiro tells his employees the following: "My childhood dream was to become a world champion on a machine I built with my own hands. I've chosen to participate in the tourist trophy races on the Isle of Man. This goal is difficult, but we must achieve it to test the viability of Japanese industrial technology and demonstrate it to the world. Here I declare my firm intention that I will participate in the tourist trophy races. I will devote all my energy and creativity to victory." And he also writes an open letter to European motorcycle manufacturers saying that in a few years, Daddy will show you how to win races.
Balls this big.
It should be said that during their European tour, they were generally received in a friendly manner, and with their colonial mindset, Europeans didn't see a threat in the polite Japanese, who were building some inexpensive, lightweight motorcycles over there. If only those guys knew what would happen to the European motorcycle industry at the end of the 60s. Honda closely observed the German Inch U-bikes in the 125cc and 250cc categories at the 1954 Tourist Trophy. The representatives themselves proudly boasted to Honda about their developments and eagerly showed him the blueprints. There is an opinion that Honda copied these machines, but that's not true. In 1957, the leading Italian motorcycle manufacturers, including MV Agusta, Gilera, and Mondial, announced they would stop participating in world championships, citing rising costs. MV Agusta would eventually withdraw from this agreement and continue to participate in races. During this time, Honda purchases one of Mondial's final racing motorcycles. The Japanese company doesn't copy this technology outright, but is largely inspired by the solutions of German and Italian engineers. Honda fully immerses himself in designing racing machines and tests them in local races, particularly in the annual races on Mount Asama. And in 1959, Honda motorcycles make their debut on the Isle of Man. The team presents 4 motorcycles with 4 riders. The best result was achieved by Naomi Taniguchi, finishing 6th in the 125cc class. An important achievement was the fact that all 4 motorcycles reached the finish without any breakdowns. And that's a really significant achievement, especially for a debuting company. The results for the others were as follows: 7th, 8th, and 11th place. And from that moment on, news spread around the world that Honda makes reliable machines. There were a few more nuances in Honda's debut race at the Tourist Trophy. In Japan, races were held on dirt roads, so the riders had to immediately adapt to the hard road surface of the Isle of Man and the behavior of road tires. And for 6 months, the racing team thoroughly studied the 60-kilometer track, preparing for the race. They arrived on the island only to find out, to their disappointment, that the 125cc class race would be held on a different track called Cliffs. Let's take a moment to talk about an important event in the company's civilian motorcycle manufacturing during this period. In 1954, Honda introduced the Juno K-Series scooter. This scooter was created with the goal of outshining competitors like the Fuji Rabbit and Mitsubishi Silver Pigeon. This machine is also notable for having an exclusively electric engine start, meaning it had an electric starter. In a year and a half, only 5,980 units were produced. Kawashima later recalled this model as the greatest failure. Juno of the K-Series suffered from engine overheating, and the fiberglass body turned out to be heavier than expected. Consequently, the 170 kg scooter with a 6.5 horsepower engine was quite underpowered in terms of performance. An interesting continuation of the Juno series in 1961-1962 were the M80 and M85 models, scooters with opposed engines of 125 and 170 cubic centimeters respectively, and a hydrostatic transmission. The technology turned out to be extremely interesting from a technical point of view, but it was very complicated for the consumer and expensive compared to competitors. This is what led to the small number of scooters produced in this series. In 1957, the technology of starting the engine with an electric starter was applied to the company's classic motorcycle of the C70 series. The C71, 250 CEC, and C76, 305 cc, models were the company's first motorcycles with electric starters, and the first to be widely exported abroad. They were exported to Europe and the United States, as well as to other markets. The C71 was showcased in the Netherlands in 1958 and at the Earl's Court exhibition in 1959, and the C76 became the flagship motorcycle of the Honda lineup in the United States market in 1959. In 1958, another small motorcycle rolled off the Honda Motor Company assembly line, destined to become a legend. This is the Honda Super Cub with a 50 cubic centimeter engine. The idea for creating this moped belonged to Fujisawa, and the main requirements for the machine were reliability, low price, extreme ease of use, and extensive bodywork to prevent the user's clothes from getting dirty. The rider should operate it one-handed while holding noodles in the other. That was Takeo's philosophy. Honda, together with other engineers, creates a prototype. Fujisawa likes this creation, and he plans to sell 30,000 units a month. And a separate factory is being built to produce such a quantity of equipment. This will be an incredible success. Super Cub is still being produced in various modifications to this day. Here, for example, in this photo is the 2023 model. Throughout its production history, this motorcycle has been equipped with engines ranging from 50 to 125 C, and it served as a starting point for some other models of the company. And during the entire production period, about 110 million original Super Cubs rolled off the assembly line. This doesn't include Chinese clones and licensed copies. This small, seemingly unremarkable Honda is the most mass-produced vehicle with an internal combustion engine in the world. In 1959, Honda burst into the United States market. This is the dream of any motorcycle manufacturer in the late 20th century, as it's the world's richest market. In this shot, you can see the building of American Honda Motor Company in California. This was Honda's first sales office in the United States. In the 1950s, United States motorcyclists made up only about 1% of the population, shaping their image during that time. Among them, there are regular guys, police officers who ride motorcycles as part of their job, and groups of biker outcasts who sometimes do all sorts of crazy things. Because of the riot in 1947 after the bike rally in the city of Hollister, by the way, most of the rioters turned out not to be bikers but local residents, the 1953 film The Wild One, which was made based on those events and statements in the press, a stereotype began to form in society. Even if you're a good person, society sees bikers as bandits, drunks, and drug addicts. However, many motorcyclists do fit this stereotype. Honda, when entering the United States market, made a simply brilliant marketing move. How do you like the slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda"? And how about this phrase, "If you need four wheels, how about a second Honda?" And this would be the beginning of Honda's triumphant march across America. And Harley-Davidson, realizing that they're losing the market, will try to do something, but Honda will already be unstoppable, both in America and in other parts of the world. In 1962, Honda builds its first overseas factory, a plant in Belgium. Let's get back to motorsport. After a decent 1959 Isle of Man debut, the racing team returns in 1960, taking 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th places in the 125cc class, and 4th, 5th, and 6th in the 250cc category. In 1961, Honda dominated the race, securing the top 5 positions in both the 125cc and 250cc classes. The secret of Honda's racing motorcycles was that their engines could run at 14,000 revolutions per minute for a long time without breaking down. In 1964, Honda faced fierce competition from the two-stroke bikes of Yamaha and Suzuki. Since Soichiro was a fan of four-stroke engines, he went on to build some absolutely crazy racing machines. They were so powerful that the competitors could only scratch their heads in bewilderment in response. And a year or two later, MotoGP would change the regulations and introduce limits on the number of cylinders in each class to give other participants a fairer chance at victory. Before the restrictions, several outstanding Honda rockets were released. The 1965 RC-149 features a 125cc engine with 5 cylinders arranged in a line. That means each miniature cylinder had a volume of just 25cc. The cylinder and piston group size is 33 by 29.2 millimeters. This beast produced 30 horsepower at 18,000 revolutions per minute. In '66, the RC-166 model appeared, 249cc and 6 cylinders in a row, 64 horsepower at 18,000 revolutions per minute. In 1959, Honda became the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. Since then, and to this day, it remains number one in terms of motorcycles produced. At that time, the ultimate goal wasn't to get a first-place certificate. Conquering the whole world was still ahead. Initially, Honda focused on flagship models with engine capacities of 250 and 305cc in the United States market. There was an interesting story with the Super Cub even before the slogan, "You meet the nicest people on a Honda." Knowing the preferences of American consumers, the company understood that a 250cc engine was actually the lower end of the market. However, for the economical transportation of sales representatives in California, a certain number of Super Cubs were imported and used specifically for this purpose. Imagine the surprise of the employees when, after a few months, the locals started to ask in large numbers, "What is that small, interesting, reliable thing that you ride every day? How can I order one? Where can I buy it?" And Honda quickly realized they should add this model to their price list. In 1961, one of the company's most significant models appears, the C-77 Superhawk. It's also called the first Japanese sports motorcycle. Despite its rather modest 305cc engine, the Superhawk had excellent potential. The first Japanese sport bike could boast 28 horsepower and could accelerate up to 165 kilometers per hour. And the C-77 was also reliable, beautiful, and won people over with its electric starter. There were also CL versions of the motorcycles in scrambler style, with a reinforced frame and an elevated muffler. It's worth noting that in different sources, you can find different nomenclature for the Dream Series motorcycles. In some places, the name is listed as, for example, C-72, and in others as CB-72. By the way, do you know what CB stands for? Silent block. Although owners can come up with about a dozen alternative interpretations. For example, classic bike, city bike, or cool beach. By the way, in 1961, Honda set an industry record at that time, of course, for the number of motorcycle sales. And that number is 100,000 per month. Large investments in advertising, as well as a very smart approach to creating that advertising itself, really helped Honda conquer the market. Pop culture also helped. For example, in the 1964 film Roustabout, Elvis Presley rode a CB-77 Superhawk. And that's because Paramount wanted to avoid the outlaw image and refused to use Harley-Davidson or Triumph bikes. This film, which coincided with the Beach Boys' 1964 song, Little Honda, became free advertising for the Japanese company. And all of this worked out in the best possible way. In 1964, about 300,000 motorcycles were sold in the United States, and every second one was a Honda. Seeing huge prospects, Soichiro invests additional funds into the development of new motorcycle models. The CB450 model debuts in 1965. It is first introduced to the general public in Britain during the speed races in Brighton in September 1965. The motorcycle was newly imported and not yet broken in. However, that didn't stop Alan Robinson from covering a kilometer in 30 seconds, reaching a speed of 160 kilometers per hour at the finish. As part of a further promotional event, Honda planned for Mike Halewood to participate on a CB450 in the 500-mile race at Brands Hatch in July of '66. Honda was not allowed to participate. It was decided that the motorcycle could not be seen or classified as production equipment because its cylinder head had 2 camshafts. Apparently, the British already felt that the dominance of their machines wouldn't last much longer. The CB450, which was called the Black Bomber or Dragon, and in Canada the Hellcat, was an excellent motorcycle, and its 43 horsepower high revving engine allowed it to accelerate up to 180 kilometers per hour. And overall, the machine was a worthy competitor to the large American and British motorcycles. However, buyers didn't really believe that this small motorcycle was capable of such performance, and sales did not meet Honda's expectations. In 1967, the manager of American Honda Motor Company, Bob Hansen, flew to Japan to meet with the company's management. He tells Soichiro that the company's flagship, the king of motorcycles, should be equipped with an inline-4 engine, not the big Batwing that Honda was developing. Soichiro listened to this idea, especially since the company had already tested inline-4 engines in their cars and racing motorcycles. Development began. By 1968, the company's engineers had already completed work on the prototype. As for the displacement, they chose 750cc since Soichiro was aware of Triumph's engine developments of that size. In 1969, the CB754 appeared on the United States and United Kingdom markets, a motorcycle that was included in the American Motorcyclist Association Classic Bikes Hall of Fame and in Discovery Channel's list of the greatest motorcycles of all time. It was faster than its competitors, introduced 4-cylinder engines to the masses for the first time, and became the first production motorcycle to use disc brakes. Of course, around the same time, Some other companies were thinking along the same lines, but Honda was the first to succeed. The CB750 also contributed to the decline of the British motorcycle industry. No attempts to recover would help it anymore. By the way, the popularity of the first superbike in the United States was boosted by the sports version, the CR750, on which in a 200-mile race in 1970, Dick Mann came in first. In the early 70s, after the success of the CB750 superbike, Honda assembled a team of developers, designers, and engineers to study the concept of a new flagship motorcycle. The team was led by Soichiro Irimajiri, a talented young engineer at the time in 1970. He was 30 years old, involved in building multi-cylinder engines for Honda racing motorcycles and the V12 unit for a Formula One car. If the CB750 was called the King of Motorcycles, then the new project was designated as the King of Kings. After evaluating the markets, the guys come to the conclusion that instead of another sports motorcycle, they need to build something suitable for long-distance travel. Guess which part of the world, at that moment, had the most people riding motorcycles over long distances? That's right, the United States of America. And for this, a small number of models from brands like Harley-Davidson, Moto Guzzi, and BMW are used. Irimajiri designs a motorcycle with a relaxed riding position, luggage space, and a versatile high-torque engine. In '72, the first prototype called M1 was ready. It was a huge motorcycle equipped with a 6-cylinder 1.5-liter boxer engine. The prototype had an issue. The lengthy engines and overall motorcycle design prevented a comfortable riding position. In a short time, the prototype was redesigned and shortened by reducing the number of cylinders. And in 1974, the first Honda Goldwing debuted with a 1-liter liquid-cooled engine. Between 1975 and 1979, Honda sold more than 97,000 units of the GL 1000 in the United States. It was a success. In 1979, the 1100 Goldwing appeared, followed by the 1200 in 1983. The era of 6-cylinder Goldwings began in 1987, with the 1500 and later the 1800. Also, based on the Goldwing, the Valkyrie Cruiser model and the F6 Bagger were later built. In 1978, Honda, wanting to pay tribute to their racing 6-cylinder models, created the CBX street motorcycle with a 1050cc inline 6, producing 105 horsepower. It was an excellent machine, highly praised by the specialized Western press. However, the CB900F had the highest sales among the flagship models during this time. While working on the story, I kept wondering, where does Honda's love for V4 engines come from? Many people are familiar with models like V4, V4R, Cross Tourer, and Magna. However, what was the starting point? Remember Honda's MotoGP dominance in the 1960s? In 1967, they withdrew from the major races. Funding for this area is reduced as the company focuses on capturing European and United States markets. In the second half of the 70s, Honda decided to return to Grand Prix. In the 500 class and beyond, 2-stroke engines dominate. However, Soichiro despises them. A competitive 4-stroke engine was necessary, and a V8 would have been suitable, but there was a problem. There's a rule in racing that says no more than 4 cylinders. I think you've guessed how Honda managed to outsmart the rules. In 1979, the NR500V racing model made its debut with 4 cylinders oval pistons, 2 connecting rods per piston, and 8 valves per cylinder. In the end, the motorcycle was unsuccessful and didn't win any races. Honda admitted their mistake in 1982 and switched to a 2-stroke and V3 engine for racing. I can imagine old man Soichiro at that moment, cursing and throwing pistons or whatever he could get his hands on at his employees, realizing that his company would still have to produce those 2-stroke engines he hated so much.
Just so you understand, one of the members of the motorcycle racing team has a scar on his head from when, during a heated discussion, Soichiro threw a motorcycle cylinder at him.
However, the V4 engine, now with regular round pistons, took its place in a number of the company's civilian models in the 1980s. And after some time, such two-stroke engines would become standard for Honda racing motorcycles, except for a brief period when the V5 would be used. The company returned to oval pistons in 1991. The NR 750 model would be released as an extremely limited series, and at that time it would be the most expensive production motorcycle in the world. A total of 322 units of this unique motorcycle were produced to order. Cruisers are a particularly interesting chapter in history. And yes, this is a story about how the Japanese went after the most sacred thing. They decided to break into the niche of classic American motorcycles, the very niche where Harley-Davidson was the monopoly in the 70s. However, Honda wouldn't be Honda if they didn't decide to do things their own way. In 1978, they launched the CX500, a motorcycle with a longitudinal V-twin engine similar to Moto Guzzi, and the CM185 with an inline twin. The CM and CMX families would expand significantly in the 80s, but we know very well that an essential part of the image of a classic American motorcycle is the V-twin engine. Sales of these not-so-authentic cruisers left much to be desired. Honda corrected this mistake in '83. It was in this year that the first Shadow model appeared. The Honda Shadow would be produced in various versions, both in terms of engine size and in appearance and style. Due to the pressure from the Japanese, Ronald Reagan's government in '83 imposed a colossal tariff of 49.4% on Japanese motorcycles with an engine capacity of more than 700 shichu. This protectionist act was intended to strengthen the position of Harley-Davidson, which had gone through tough times in the 70s. Also, in '83, the Honda Phi 65 Magna appeared. It was definitely a cool cruiser with a distinctly Japanese approach to things. During the tariff period, most models were adjusted to fit its regulations. The same Shadow, instead of a 750cc engine, got a 700cc engine. However, after a short period of time, Harley became so confident that they demanded the tariff be lifted a year before it was set to expire. This triggered a new wave of development from the Japanese. Larger, more powerful, and more striking models began to appear. In the 90s, the Shadow grew to 1100cc, and in the 2000s, the VTX series appeared. Another iconic line of machines was the Rebel family, which originated in 1985. Among the interesting cruiser developments, it's worth mentioning the CTX series and the NM4 Voltus model. At the end of this chapter, it's worth noting that Honda has never been afraid of experiments and new trends. For example, when the world was going crazy over Felix Wankel's rotary engine, the company, without licensing the design of this engine, built a prototype based on a classic motorcycle. Judging by the coloring of the prototype, this is most likely the year 1973. The prototype of the motorcycle with a rotary engine was clearly intended to see whether Honda was missing its chance in a potentially promising niche. The first half of the 80s was marked by a trend of using turbochargers on motorcycles, and all of the Japanese Big Four didn't miss out on it. Honda was the second to mass-produce turbo motorcycles. The CX500 Turbo debuted in 1982, followed by the CX650 a year later. Only 1,777 CX Series turbo motorcycles rolled off the assembly line. In this chapter, let's address a long-standing question. How is Honda doing with off-road motorcycles, and how has this family developed? Do you remember that Honda had motorcycle versions with the CL index in the early 60s? These were scrambler-style bikes which differed from the classic versions by having a reinforced chassis, higher fenders, an elevated exhaust, and tires that were a bit more aggressive than the standard road ones. Do you remember the boom that happened in the United States market with Honda motorcycles during that period? So the Trail 50 and Super Cub are being bought up by the truckload. You can often see these little ones attached to the bumper of a camper or in recreational vehicle. And people ride these bikes a lot while they're on vacation and also explore the surrounding areas. And even though this isn't enduro equipment, it's enough to handle some light off-road terrain. And even if you get stuck somewhere and can't get through, you can easily pull or push a light bike out by yourself. In the United States during this time, a passion for off-road riding was emerging, and these small motorcycles, along with the company's more powerful scramblers, played a key role in fueling this trend. The first true mini bike from Honda, created exclusively for off-road use, was the Z50 Mini Trail from 1968. The three-speed motorcycle, which looked a lot like a deformed Beetle, had a folding handlebar, so it could easily be placed in the trunk of a car. In the United States, 450,000 units of the Z50 were sold, and it introduced more young people to off-road riding than any other motorcycle model. These have all been four-stroke engines so far. However, in the 1960s and for several decades after, two-stroke engines began to dominate motocross and off-road riding globally. Soichiro Honda once publicly stated that Honda would never produce motorcycles with two-stroke engines. However, he still had to compromise on this principle more than once in order for his company's products to remain competitive. Still, the desire for dominance and greatness would prove stronger than his dislike for the two-stroke engine. At the beginning of the 70s, the company started working on a motocross motorcycle model. And in the spring of 73, the first representative of the Elsinore family appears, the Honda CR 250M, the first mass-produced two-stroke racing motorcycle that the company built from scratch, instead of adapting a road motorcycle for these purposes. And it was also the first Japanese motocross motorcycle that managed to surpass European motocross machines. In the fall of 73, the CR25M model was added to the lineup, and in 74, the MR50 motocross bike for young riders appeared. And all of these models would be pretty fierce two-strokes in their class. Simultaneously, the family of off-road vehicles based on the Super Cub engine was also evolving, with various motorcycle models and even a tricycle called the All-Terrain Cycle.
It's the only all-terrain cycle under 200cc with electric starting.
For the next decade or so, off-road motorcycles were the coolest thing on the planet. And Japanese manufacturers were waging a war for technical superiority, introducing new technologies not just every year, but every race. When the Honda CR 500 appeared in 1984, it embodied everything Honda had learned from decades of motocross racing. It was a motocross bike, closely resembling the special racing machines used in competition. It was a monster with a two-stroke engine of 491 cubic centimeters and a power output of 53 horsepower. Production continued until 2001, but legends about this motorcycle are still around to this day. The CR series itself existed until 2007. It was gradually replaced starting from 2002 by the four-stroke CRF family. But all of these are motocross bikes or small displacement models built on the Cub engine. What about enduro? The stylish scramblers of the 60s were replaced by bikes that were more focused on off-road riding. In 1972, the Honda XL 250 appeared. At that time, it was the first modern four-stroke enduro motorcycle and the first mass-produced four-valve single-cylinder motorcycle. It was this model that became the ancestor of the XL family, which would grow over the next 15 years. The largest model would be the XL 600E AR. In 1987, the NX family would replace the XL series, with the NX 250, which lasted only 2 years, and the more successful NX 650 Dominator. In the early 1980s, the Paris-Dakar rally gained popularity. Honda first participated in 1981 with French rider Cyril Neveu finishing 6th. In 1982, Neveu won the rally for Honda. In 1986, the company introduced a new racing machine, the NXR 750, and in 1988, the model gained another 50 cubic centimeters in engine displacement. And the team won the rally 4 times in a row from 1986 to 1989 inclusive. Honda then took a 24-year hiatus from the Dakar, only returning in 2013. So, what am I getting at? Basically, the Paris-Dakar rally served as a catalyst for the birth of the adventure enduro class and the rise of its popularity. And against the backdrop of this very popularity, in 1987 the Trans-Alp motorcycle series was born, which is still being produced to this day. Until the 2023 XL 750 model with an inline twin, all previous models had a V-twin engine. And in 1989, for the mass consumer in this niche, the Africa Twin 750 appears. Later, as the class developed, the leader class Varadero appeared, and even later a new reincarnation of the Africa Twin with a 1-liter engine and then with a 1.1-liter engine. And Honda also had the legendary XR 250 Enduro model, of which more than 800,000 units were produced over its entire run. And not without reason. One of its versions was nicknamed Baja, derived from the name of the 1,000-mile race on the Baja California Peninsula. Listing the many motorcycle models, we've drifted a bit away from the personality of Soichiro Honda. As the story goes on, it might seem that Soichiro is still the same young and energetic man. However, remember the dates. Honda was born in 1906, so by the time he bought himself a tank of alcohol after the war, he was already 40. And in the 70s and 80s, he was an old man, active and just as ambitious, but still an old man. Time flies quickly. Honda remained the president of the company until his retirement in 1973. However, after this event, he did not abandon the work of his life. He stayed on as a director, and in 1983 he was appointed as the company's supreme advisor. While in retirement, Soichiro focused more on public activities. The Honda Foundation was established in 1980 to hold a competition among young engineers and provide financial support to the most talented participants. And in that same year, 1980 People magazine included Soichiro in the list of the 25 most intriguing people of the year, dubbing him the Japanese Henry Ford. In his memoirs, Soichiro Honda expressed regret that sometimes he treated his employees harshly and at times even resorted to physical actions.
The cylinders needed frequent upkeep. He had impressive throwing accuracy.
In 1991, on August 5th, at the age of 83, Soichiro Honda passes away. He will forever remain in the memory of many as a legend of motorcycle and automobile engineering. As for other key figures of the company, Takeo Fujisawa retired in 73, Soichiro Irimajiri, who started as an engineer at the company in the late 40s, was one of the directors by the 80s and resigned in 92. It's important to understand that since the 60s, Honda has been a huge enterprise with a lot of factories, and not just in one place, but all over the world with many subsidiaries, like Honda Racing Corporation, for example, a lot of dealerships, and so on. All of this is managed by local executives with the board of directors at the top. And the most important thing for companies during the 70s and 80s is that the reins of power are passed from the founding fathers to competent people, and not, as sometimes happens, to talentless heirs. Talented managers lead, engineers create, and marketers promote and sell. It is worth noting that at the dawn of the company's founding, Soichiro and Takeo made an agreement that they would never force their sons to join the company. For example, Soichiro's son, Hirotoshi Honda, was the founder and former chief executive officer of Mugen Motorsports, a Honda tuning company that created original racing cars in the 80s and for several decades after. The company's range of motorcycles is becoming increasingly diverse. And for Honda, the 80s were marked by the rise of a class of vehicles that you are well familiar with. It's scooters. Did you think I forgot about them? If you were paying close attention, you remember that the first scooter was this model from 1954. Juna, a product with several issues, struggled to gain popularity. The two scooter models with opposed engines that followed in the early 60s had a similar fate due to their high cost and complex design. The company forgot about this type of vehicle for a while, but in the 70s, it succeeded with the P50 and Express moped lineup. For Honda, modern scooters were the next logical step after mopeds. And in 1980, the first representative of the scooter family appeared, called the NB50, which was known as the Tact in Japan and the Aero 50 in the United States. You can't ignore the unusual folding design called the Honda Motocompo. This folding moped appeared in 1981 and was created as an accessory for compact cars. It was intended that, thanks to the ability to take the moped in the car's trunk, the driver could, upon reaching an intermediate point of the trip, switch to the moped and continue traveling at a decent speed and with relative comfort. Sales of the city car were planned at 8,000 units per month and the Motocompo at 10,000. While the car achieved its goals, only about 53,000 mopeds were sold in 2 years. In '83, a more powerful Aero 80 was prepared for the American market. At the same time, Honda also developed a more conservatively styled scooter based on the Express mopeds. This model was called the Express SR and had most of the conveniences of a modern scooter, except for an enclosed storage compartment. 1984 became a very significant year. The two-stroke Aero 125 model was added to the scooter lineup. However, overall, the company set a course for environmentally friendly technology, and soon Honda switched all scooters except the 50 cubic ones to four-stroke engines. Due to this trend, the four-stroke Elite 125 debuted in the same year. This scooter was the first representative of the Elite family, which for decades would hold a prominent place in Honda's scooter lineup. The other two new scooters were the surprisingly small Spree and the unique three-wheeled Gyro. By the way, this is an abbreviation that stands for Great Your Recreational Original. In translation, an excellent original means for your recreation. In 1988, a scooter debuted that was destined to become a legend. This is Honda Dio. Thanks to its compactness, reliability, and maneuverability, this model gained huge popularity. The Dio continues to be manufactured, with a vast quantity of these scooters having been produced. The Elite and Helix were among the larger scooters of the period. Both were equipped with a 250cc engine. In the 2000s, active competition with other Japanese companies and Italian scooter manufacturers led to a significant expansion of Honda's lineup. With similar specifications, different design options appeared. For example, a retro style on the CHF 50 model, or this kind of urban look on the Ruckus. Honda's designers would experiment even more with the Ruckus model. Apparently, they stumbled upon the remains of a tank that Soichiro bought back in '46. And only after that, in 2005, they introduced the Big Ruckus. In 2002, the family got its largest maxi scooter, the Honda Silver Wing. By the way, the name Silver Wing was previously used by Honda for the CX 500 and 650 models. Yes, those very ones that had a layout similar to Moto Guzzi. With a 600cc engine, it was for a long time the largest scooter ever offered by Honda. And it was Honda's response to the growing public interest in large touring scooters. The further development of this family kept up with the times and market trends. An interesting fact is that in 2017, Honda introduced a line of adventure scooters. This is a kind of symbiosis between a scooter in the classic sense and a touring enduro. The flagship in this niche is the XADV 750, which has the same engine as the NC 750. There are also versions with 350cc and 150cc engines. What about other classes of motorcycles? In the early 80s, the trend for civilian sport bikes began. Before that, sports bikes were used exclusively on the track. However, to meet the demand, Japanese companies, including by the middle of this decade, introduced the first versions of civilian sport bikes. These motorcycles incorporate a lot of racing technology, and for legal road use, They are equipped with a full set of lights, mirrors, and a horn. Usually in the sport bike niche from Honda, the leading position is given to the CBR 400 model, the very first model that started the CBR lineup, which appeared in 1983. But at least a year earlier, a much less well-known sports model, the MVX 250 was released with a two-stroke V3 engine. This engine had the same configuration as the one used in Grand Prix racing. Later, the NSR 250R model would be produced with a similar power unit. As for the CBR family, in 1986 the 250 model was added, and a year later the 600 and 750 models appeared. There was also the sport touring version, the CBR 1000F. And for the most part, these motorcycles, except for the modern small displacement CBRs, are equipped with four-cylinder inline engines. In the mid-90s, Honda was determined to produce the fastest production motorcycle in the world, and to claim the bragging rights and marketing influence that at the time belonged to the Kawasaki Ninja ZX-11. This desire led to the creation of the CBR 1100XX Blackbird, also known as the Blackbird. The name Blackbird was not chosen by accident. It's a reference to the Lockheed SR-71 aircraft, the fastest production aircraft in the world. The Blackbird appeared in 1996 and surpassed the ZX-11, showing a top speed of 287 kilometers per hour. The CBR 1100XX would hold the title of the fastest production motorcycle for 3 years before the Hayabusa from Suzuki appeared. In other machinery classes, Honda is keeping up and sometimes leading the pack. Touring, enduro, cruisers, classic motorcycles, sport tourers, small bikes. No matter which niche you look into over the decades, there will be 10 to 20 models of machinery represented there. And I think you perfectly understand that in this video, my goal is not to list every single Honda model. The main thing is that we've covered the most vivid and significant chapters in the company's history. How are things going with Honda now? The company remains the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer to date. Here are some numbers for you. By the end of 2019, the number of motorcycles produced had exceeded 400 million units. This is the largest manufacturer of internal combustion engines in the world. And as of 2015, it was the 8th largest car manufacturer. About 220,000 people work at all Honda factories, offices, and facilities. Huge amounts of money are spent on new research and development. Just to give you an idea, here are a couple of questions and answers. A motorcycle with an automatic transmission, that's Honda. A motorcycle with a hydraulic transmission, again, that's Honda, and so on. The current lineup of motorcycles is just as broad and responds promptly to trends and fashions in the motorcycle market, both globally and locally. What can be said in conclusion to this big historical story? The incredible success of Honda happened thanks to a number of factors, including both random and planned events. And what depended on people happened that way precisely because of their lively minds and talent, skillful leadership and organization, and great diligence. And not only thanks to the talents of Soichiro Honda, Takeo Fujisawa, engineer Kawashima, or engine developer Iri Majiri, but also thanks to the many thousands of responsible and hardworking employees throughout the company's history whose names have not been as well preserved. And this material is even more interesting and lively than other motorcycle manufacturing stories precisely because of the vibrant personality of Soichiro Honda, a true rock and roller from the world of motorcycles and cars. This brings the brief history of Honda motorcycles to an end. As usual, this was the Krasmodo channel with you. Wrapping up this big project, I can say the following. I got a lot of enjoyment from it, despite all the difficulties and the time spent. People have long asked me to tell the story of Honda's history, but it was at this moment that I chose to do it. If it had happened earlier, the story would have looked much worse and I couldn't put it off any longer. If you enjoyed the video, please show your support by sharing and subscribing. it's appreciated. I don't rule out the possibility that there may be some mistakes in this material. You can always point them out and correct them constructively in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and special thanks to everyone who supports the channel financially using the pinned details. See you next time.